Welcome everyone to City Club of Tacoma's March 20th programs. Washington School Funding, the Post-McCleary Challenge. I'm Kristen Eng, Board President of City Club of Tacoma. I'm thankful that everyone is here. Such civic people. I'd like to thank our gracious host, my alma mater, University of Puget Sound, for having this lovely dinner for all of us. And tonight's program will be video recorded with the slides by our media sponsor, the University of Washington, Tacoma. Thank you. And I'd also like to thank one last sponsor, our newest sponsor, Clover Park Technical College. It is because of sponsors like this that makes City Club programming possible, and they are preparing our students for the job careers of today and tomorrow in likes of aviation, accounting, aerospace, healthcare. And I actually had the opportunity to attend the Communities in Schools luncheon on Monday at McGavick in Clover Park Central, and it did really make me think about what it takes to educate a child, like what it really takes to support and empower youth to make life choices and educational choices from a position of strength. So I'm very thankful for Clover Park Technical College for supporting City Club of Tacoma. And I guess now we begin our program. I'm very honored and I'm very proud to introduce Terry Bergeson, 3-term state superintendent. She has been fabulous. She's a great member. She's the one who's been getting this program together. She's gone to Olympia. She's met with all the people on the panel list and with me several times and made this slideshow possible. And this is truly what membership-driven organization is really about. And so we're thankful for Terry for being our moderator and getting this program together. Thank you, Terry.
Thank you, Kristen. Well, I'm very excited we're here today. This has been an adventure for the last month. With somebody who knew so much about the old system as a state superintendent and a union leader and a district administrator. I've been in all the roles, and there's a lot of change we're going to be talking to you about tonight, but it's been a fascinating journey, and I want to thank Kristen as our new president, and Katie Baird, who's the director of the programs for City Club, and all the leadership of City Club for giving us an opportunity to do this. And we're having it videotaped, and the videotape will be made available to both on the City Club website, and we can get it out to other people that might want to share it if it's worth your while tonight, and we think it will be. So tonight, and I most of all, I want to thank the wonderful 5 people we have on our panel. You want to just sit there until I'm done, and then you can come up. You might as well relax, because it'll take me about 10 minutes to do the opening. I'm going to give you a little history here, and then the panelists will come up. But all of them are educators, legislators, people that are up to their eyeballs trying to deal with what we're going to be talking about tonight, and they have given me so much time and help to try to not only get the background, but the impact of the things that we're talking about. So what we're going to do tonight, looking at the Washington School Funding and the Post-McCleary challenges. And our goal this evening is to have a deeper understanding, to help you to create a deeper understanding of the funding dilemma. After we think we've fixed everything, we still have this dilemma. And what are the implications of that for our kids, our students in the schools, and for our communities? And we're going to talk about the big picture of school funding, so a little bit of history, the impact of the McCleary decision, so you can get some kind of plain English as much as that's possible to talk about this, and then the differential impacts of districts, because we have Tacoma as our major focus, obviously, because this is where our City Club is, but we also have educators from other districts here, and we have Joel, who is the leader of the Washington Association of School Administrators, and he was a small school district administrator. He knows the picture across the state, and a wonderful representative who's going to really do some fighting in this last few weeks of the legislature to help fix this, and she's an educator herself. So we're going to look at those perspectives, and then we're going to try to, as we go through tonight, talk about some potential solutions that come out of the problem, and then open it up for at least a half an hour for questions from the audience itself. So I want to start with this clause from the Washington State Constitution, the Paramount Duty Clause. It is the paramount duty of the state to make ample provision, that word ample is what McCleary is all about, for the education of all children residing within its borders without distinction or preference on account of race, color, caste, or sex. Article 9, Section 1, Washington State Constitution. It's the strongest language in the United States for support for schools. And it's driven all the lawsuits and all the solutions and all the things that we've done. Now, we're going to talk tonight about state funding and local funding. And there's other things like federal and grants and lots of stuff that Tacoma has done. But we're concentrating tonight on the local levy funding and the state funding. So I went back. Did you need something, Chris?
I was just going to announce something. Okay. These slides are also available online at the cityclubtacoma.org. So if you also wanted to look at your phones, it's also available for you.
Thank you, Kristen. I should have said that. So this first picture is back in 1974-75. I came to Tacoma to Galt Junior High in 1969. And these numbers were even more on the local end when I first came. But in 1974-75, 32% of the money that went to schools came from local dollars from levies. 51% came from the state, and the rest was the federal and the other category. If you jump up to 2017-18, same pie chart, and you look at the blue and the purple, state money is now up to 71% and levies at 18%. And then we did another slide for tonight that looks at this year. And you see 77.4% state funding and local taxes are 14.7%. So there's been a major shift in the source of funding. And our state is very complicated. We have different tax valuations. Property taxes are different all across the state. That affects every single district that we have. So the differences in the local property tax is part of what drove a lot of the changes. So I'm going to give you a little history lesson. It'll be a 2-minute shot at history here. Back to before 97, about a third of local funding, no limits on levies, very strong local control. And then there were major levy failures, including Bellevue and Seattle. And when Seattle and Bellevue and 64 other districts had double levy failures, everybody woke up. It was a tough time financially for the country, and the local taxpayers have to pony up for the levy funds, as well as they don't pay much attention to the state property tax, but they do pay attention to the local levies. So that drove a bunch of lawsuits, and then Judge Dorn got involved, and we had the Dorn decision in 1977. And the legislature created the Basic Education Act, which was the big funding law for the state of Washington. And they said, no levies above 10%. We're going to do full, ample state funding. Well, that never happened. Never happened. They never came down. And I was president of WA, or vice president at the time, in 1978. Dan Grimm was the treasurer, one of our strong City Club members. And we had this committee on a local effort assistant, levy equalization, with all these little guys failing that were in property-poor districts, where because the property, they have to pay more money out to pass the levy than if you've got a wealthier place like King County. So there's more people to pay for it. So those little guys were dropping like flies. So our solution was to create the local effort assistance, or the levy equalization. And what we said in the deal, and Seattle and Bellevue were listening to the deal because they had lived with a double levy failure. So they suddenly had some empathy for the rest of the state. And out of that, we said if you pass a 10% local levy, the state will match it with 10% of state property tax. So you get up to 20. Bingo. And we put an escalator clause. We put a cost of living clause in it. So all of a sudden, levies started to pass, and things went along pretty nicely for a while. The next big jump that happened was in 1993, when it was House Bill 1209. That's when I got involved with the Education Improvement Act. And all of a sudden we had learning standards and we had assessments, and there was accountability for results. It wasn't just how hard you worked, what were the results? Were kids across the board achieving? That put enormous pressure and change across the whole state. Every year as state superintendent, I asked for money, a lot of money, to help support the changes that needed to be made. They never changed the Basic Ed Act. They would fund a little of this, a little of that. There were all kinds of pots of money. They weren't like little. They had quite a few bucks in them, but they were little compared to what we needed. And so lawsuits started again. Bingo, bingo. A bunch of parent groups got together. And then in 2010, they did this prototypical schools model. And that's, I don't want you to worry too much about that, but you're going to hear some stuff about that from the administrators and the teachers that are here, because they set up a model where you're supposed to have a certain amount of staff in a school building at elementary or middle or high school. Now, they didn't change the money. They just made a model so people could look at what they were supposed to do, and they never really did get the money to do it. So the lawsuits increased. And in 2012, the McCleary decision was reached for the plaintiffs, which meant we're going back to the paramount duty, to the ample funding for schools, and here we go. So several years later, in 2017, McCleary, the House Bill 2242 was passed to implement the McCleary decision. And remember the Supreme Court was taking, what was it, 100 grand a day they were taking out of the legislature? They were fining them, the only place in the country that ever happened. So there was a huge pressure to fix it. And in that last session in 2017, some big stuff happened. So what was in McCleary? And this is just the very top level, and you'll hear more specifics. The 2017-19 operating budget, the legislature said there was $7.3 billion new dollars, and that had happened over several years. Educators were saying, wait a minute, $3 billion of those dollars were taken away from us from the levies. You just used the levy tax to say you did all this stuff. So there was already a big fight going on about that. And the winners and losers are very clear now that this has been implemented. Then, of course, they had to raise the state property tax to pay for the extra money that went in. Beyond the levy money. They took levy money and capacity of levy. They didn't actually take the money, but they took the capacity away. And then King County had a big hit, because that's where all the money is, and there were lower taxes in other parts of the state. So again, we see this disparity that has to get, if we're going to follow the Constitution, we have to figure out a way to make it fairer, make it more ample enough for everybody. And then the big thing, another big thing, was the dramatic change in the way they did the funding. The whole salary and staff allocation system was thrown out the window, and they started over. They eliminated the use of levies to a great extent, and levy equalization dollars. So all those decisions along the historical route went away in order to supposedly move the money in to do a better job for the whole state. But it ends up being kind of a zero-sum game. Maybe that's not fair, a zero-sum game, but it was getting down there. Now, this is a weird picture, and I want to just show you a couple of these pictures, because this is the sample salary staff allocation model. This is the salary grid that for probably 50 years in the state, on the vertical axis, you have the years of experience, from a newcomer coming in the door to someone with 16 plus years in the business. On the horizontal axis, you have the level of education. So it's you can't even read it, so don't worry. You'll be able to look at it when you see the thing. But it's like when you come in with a bachelor's degree and no experience, that's the first cell, all the way down to cells where people are beyond 16 years and they have a PhD and a master's and 42 other things. And the schedule was built to encourage education and encourage longevity in the system. Well, that's gone. The whole model's gone. And what they did is said, this was the stunner for me when I first was looking at this, 40 grand for the minimum, 90 grand for the maximum, and we'll raise it up over the years. We'll let it go up. But that's where we start, and we're going to fund the median. So instead of that grid you just saw, they're funding an average amount for the whole staff structure. So some people got, and then somebody, I don't know if it was getting votes at the end or what it was, because nobody can figure out the rationale for regionalizing salaries. they put extra salaries into some districts and not in other districts. And it was basically, the concept was, if you live in Seattle, we want you to teach, if you teach in Seattle, we want you to live near your kids. So if we got high property taxes, we want you to stay there. So we're going to give you a little more money. The state's going to give you a little more money. The district could already bargain more, but the state decided to do that. So Tacoma gets 12%, and that brings their average up to 73,842. Olympia gets 0. Some districts, I think it was Shoreline, gets 24%. Why? Who knows? I don't know what that's all about. Nobody can figure out the regionalization, and there's a lot of arguing about what it means, because it's a lot of money when you add it up statewide. Now this even weirder picture, you don't have to read what's on it because it's impossible, but you've got a green part and an orange part. And this is the reality of districts. They have a career ladder. And they've been getting all these different amounts in that career ladder. Now they get this average. So if you have a lot of staff in the orange section that have been around a long time and they've got a lot of education, they are going to cost you much more than the state sends. If you get a lot of newbies at the front end, oh, you can afford that. Now, over time, first of all, it's an amazing hit. One district has a tiny district down in the, well, Joel will talk about some of the different districts, but it's all over the map. So the averaging, Olympia is $20 million in the hole because of this distribution of their staff. This is a picture of Olympia. And they've got a lot of people that have a lot of education and they've stayed a long time. So it doesn't work for them, and it doesn't work for a lot of other people. So then, last slide for me is the big consequences. Dramatic shifts in both the structure and the funding of salaries. And a lot of new resources at the beginning with a lot of confusing messages between the legislature and the SPI and everything about what you can do with all that money. So every single business office in the state of Washington and schools are going nuts. They have to reprogram the reports they send in, how they distribute their money. And then there's major constraints on the levy. Tacoma, and one of the reasons I'm here, is Tacoma in the last 8 years has made more progress than I've ever seen in my lifetime of being here. And they've done it because they've used not only the state resources, but other resources wisely, and the community has come in and helped them. And everybody's mad now. They lost 51% of the levy. Olympia lost 48%. Lake Washington gained 2%. Who knows why? I don't mean to badmouth Lake Washington if anybody's here, but it's like, what? So then, the regionalization issue is very confusing and it's very contentious because teachers don't live in Seattle necessarily. They might live in Highline and they drive into Seattle. You know, the whole thing doesn't work, but it's in place. And then it all happened almost immediately. Very abrupt timeline. So people have had to struggle to figure out, what are we going to do? And the funding from the state, the new state money, was mainly for class size reduction, K-3, and for programs that are pretty restricted programs like bilingual and special ed. Still not enough money in many of those programs, but the state dollars, that's why the levy, the creativity of the levy dollars helped. So that's the quandary statewide. And now I want to move to the panel and have the panel come up. And we've got Carla, and then Carla and Rosalind are going to talk, and then Angel's going to talk. So you guys can choose your chairs wherever you want. I should have let you come up in the beginning, sorry. I'll sit in the end one here so I can. And then we're going to move to Joel, and he'll have a statewide perspective, and then Lori will talk about the legislature. So Tacoma, Carla Santorno. You got, I'm going to hold this one. You want to start with this?
Thank you. Appreciate having a chance to tell our story. That's a great preamble. It kind of sets up what we're saying. And I want to start with the success piece. And a lot of you have seen that slide that shows that over the last 9 years, we've raised our graduation rate 34%. And we've had those successes because of the money that we have in the levy, because it's unrestrained, it's unrestricted, It's not unrestricted, but we have the freedom to be innovative and to look at different things. So it's paid for. We've upped our SAT participation because we pay for the test. We let the kids take the test. We've upped our certifications, and that's students not that maybe don't want to go to college, but they're getting their forklift certification. They can go into earn a job right away using a forklift, a tied flat certification, a culinary arts certification. So it's allowed us to allow students to go get that training so they're ready when they graduate from high school for a real job. It's a little too late for my son, but we're still hoping. There's a algebra, our algebra passing rate has gone up. Our enrollment in preschool, getting kids ready for kindergarten, we've been able to do that. We're one of the few districts in the state that have preschool we've raised our preschool slots by over 500 students. And then we've increased our 6th grade pass rate. So you'll see innovation and work that's gone on from preschool all the way to high school, really working to make sure, and it's about just looking at needs and saying what's keeping you from going, and then getting you there. Now, sometimes I think one of the things we have, I've talked about it to this group I think before, is the VANI, and everybody goes, what in the world is a VANI? But we have focused so much on graduation to college that sometimes we forget. I forgot to stop my timer. We forget that some students don't want to go to college and they need these other opportunities. And so one of the things we started was a verified acceptance to the next institution. So you can't leave high school saying, I don't know what I'm going to do, I'm going to get a job. You have to have a verified acceptance. So if you're going to work, then bring us the letter from the boss that's going to hire you. If you're going to go to the military, bring us the military letter. And then that gives us a measurement that we can track to make sure you're going to the next step. And we celebrate them. We have parties just like the acceptance to college. We do those other celebrations. So the next slide. I love showing this. I take this all around the country when I'm speaking, and people look at those statistics and they say, okay, 30,000 students, that's including preschool, 62% students of color, 11% English language learners, 15% in special education, 58% of students in poverty. And they say, oh, she's going to talk about how they overcame all this horrible stuff. But I use this slide to celebrate our diversity. You can't get a better, richer, warmer place to live than Tacoma Public Schools, because we're taking care of all students. And when you graduate from Tacoma, you know how to work in a diverse world. You can go to China and navigate that. You can do anything, and it's part of that whole child learning. So I am excited to be able to show those statistics and say, hey, we're having incredible success taking kids where they are and go. One of the things that happens sometimes is that people think, well, she's only doing things, they're only using their levy money to support, kids that are underprivileged or economically poor, but that's not true. That levy money has fueled our specialty schools, SODA, SAMI, Lincoln, IDEA, our School of the Arts. That levy money allows us to put in the funds that takes care of those students that want. We have summer school, but we have summer school for kids who didn't get enough credit during the year. We have summer school for students that want to take advanced chemistry because they can't shove it in, to their regular schedule. So it's not just for poor kids. It's for upper middle class students that want to push ahead. They get their internships, apprenticeships, all of those things. And you'd be surprised how many middle class families can't afford an IB exam or an AP exam and all those exams. And so paying for those really makes a difference. So we need those things because it makes a difference with what we're doing with our students. And the other thing that I'm really cognizant of, and that I tell just honestly, is we have lots of work to do. Our gaps in graduation have almost disappeared, and in some cases with some ethnic groups they have disappeared. But we have other gaps that we haven't taken care of yet. So even though we've made gains, we still have a large gap between our ethnic groups. And it's important to me, it's important to all of us to make sure that it doesn't matter where you live in Tacoma, it doesn't matter what color you are, it doesn't matter how much money you make, we can make gains no matter what your demographic is. And people are always coming up to me and saying, "Guy, Santorum, when are you gonna hang it up?" And my answer to that is when you can't tell where people live by, you can't tell their achievement by where they live. That's just really important to me. They've got to be able to do that. So if we have work to do and we're doing these things, it's easy to see that if you lose 51% of the money you're using to pull that off, you're in trouble. So if you look at the next one, and Terry explained it, and I just want you to soak in this chart. So with those numbers that you're given, then we get that $1,297 per student. Lake Washington gets $2,500 per student, and I like the superintendent in Lake Washington. We get along. But crap, she got $65 million more dollars than we did, so that's upsetting. You see the free and reduced lunch in Lake Washington is 11%, so you can see the balance of things she can do with her money that doesn't need to provide help for kids getting into kindergarten, getting into preschool. And then look at that regionalization. So they get 18% more money because of the high property taxes for where they live, and we get 12. And hey, I'm not skipping Yakima. I was testifying in Olympia, and I was listening to this district, the guy who was testifying next to me. And when you're a big city district, you pretty much just think we're not big city, we're small city. But if you're in a small city district, you think about our needs. And I'm sitting next to this guy that's testifying, and he lost $100,000, and I'm thinking, oh, please, you only lost $100,000. The $100,000 was the only money he got. He had 2 properties in his district, and so that made a big difference. And he said they didn't know where they're going to get social studies books the next year. I mean, so it's not just Tacoma; it's all over. We're all looking, and Rosalind is really going to start to dissect what that means, and she'll give you the numbers for that. But what I want to go back to is that ample funding. We need a school funding model that provides ample funding that is fair and equitable to all. That is not it. This model illustrates a huge disparity. Low property values influence the resources we receive. You've heard me say it before, that this disparity is a civil rights issue. And I don't know why we keep sweeping that under the rug. This is inherently unfair. There's other flaws. Terry talked a little bit about them: special education, teacher salaries, districts, specific other things that the district has to do. And Rosalind will show you those disparities. But finally, I live in Tacoma, I work in Tacoma, I vote in Tacoma. I'm a part of the 64% who voted for this levy. And so I want the legislature to let our vote count, to give us that money. And I always say this, if you want to leave the levy this exactly the same way and let it stand, I'm all right with that, as long as you give me the money I lost. Figure out how to do it and give us the money. Thank you. Good job.
So I always feel like a letdown after Carla, because she's such a good speaker, and I'm so proud of the work that we do here in Tacoma, and it's hard for me to get up here and talk to you about the concerns and the problems that we're experiencing, but I think that it's really important for you to have a blanket understanding of the impacts that we are experiencing. Yes, please. So I know Joel is going to talk a little bit about this slide, or a very similar slide, and I want to highlight a few things. There are lots of disparities among districts. There is no easy way to explain the issues with McCleary by just looking at one particular district. You have to look at many of them. Here in Tacoma, if you would just go through all of them. Okay. Thank you. That was one too far. Here in Tacoma, what we're experiencing are a number of these things. These are some of the common problems that we're seeing across the state. But if I look at the profile of students, so we have a higher special education population here in Tacoma, and that provides us with, thank you, and that can you hear me okay?
Is the thing? You can take it out of that.
So we have a higher population of special education students here in Tacoma, and that puts us in a position where we have higher needs, higher costs associated with those students. And so for the Tacoma School District, we have to fund $9 million of special education costs out of our local levies. We're working with the state on ways to address these issues, but we're required by federal law, Free and Public Education Act, to provide those services. And so if we're not being funded by the state for those services, we're going to fund them. We're going to have to reprioritize our budget and definitely provide for those services as an example of one area where we are struggling. Another example would be in our levy. As was discussed today, we've lost over 50% of our levy. And I'll go through on the next slide a little more what that looks like. And one final thing, we do fall into the staff profile. Our staff is more than 50% has 15 years of experience and a master's degree. So when you look at that orange side of the chart that Terry showed, almost all of our staff, half of our staff fall into that higher cost salary component. And so that has an impact on us when we're only receiving the average state salary. I'll also show you some slides that show that we fund more teachers than what the state provides. If you'll go one for me, Terry. These are our district revenue projections. In 2018-19, we have about $466 million in our budget. When we move into the 2019-20 year, based on the current McCleary law, we will lose $29.9 million of legislative funding. That is something that we will have to work to address internally. If the legislature isn't able to come up with a solution for the levy dollars that we'll be losing, then we will have significant impacts that we will have to address. That could put programs at risk, it could put staff at risk. And I think that it's important to note that even in the next 3 years, we're still not going to recover to the point where we are today with the way that the current law is written. Go to that next one for me. We currently use our levy funding for lots of things. Teachers are an example of that. The state funds us for 1,270 teachers. We're currently providing for 1,389 teachers. So those teachers are funded out of the levy. Now, Terry said we can't use the levy to fund teachers. We can use the levy to fund teacher salaries that are above and beyond that prototypical formula. So they define for us, here's what the state's going to provide you, and any resources beyond that, we can then add on teachers to support services. These teachers help in classrooms. They're providing lower class sizes in certain circumstances. They're doing coaching with our teachers to make them better teachers. And so they're very valued resources. This is almost $14 million of our levy that we're using. Just for the teachers. And if you go further, you'll see there are other gaps. So the state doesn't provide us any funding for athletic programs. We know that athletic programs help to engage kids and help to keep them involved in school, keep them active after school, and we find great value in them. We invest in $3.9 million in those services using our levy. Counselors, the state funds 54, we have 97. Librarians, we get 36 funded, we have 46 on staff. Safety and security, we only get 5 salaried people provided to us by the state. And so we fund 34 because we know that our needs are greater. And then same thing with nurses, we have 5, and with the high needs of some of our special education students, we're pushed into a position where we need actually more than what is provided. In addition to that, just if you look at the health impacts of the geriatric community, you see a lot of diabetes, you see a lot of other, significant medical issues that we're having to address within our schools, and those sometimes require nursing services, excuse me.
And so this is that prototypical model that I mentioned, that there's a staffing formula they send out, but it doesn't match what is needed. Is that fair, Rosalind?
Yeah, if you want to go one more for me. So I know Carla has already discussed this slide. I think that it's really important to impress upon you that the inequity exists and that we have significant impacts that our district is going to have to address if we cannot come to a levy solution. And while we have been working very hard with the legislature and we're testifying on a regular basis, Carla's going down again tomorrow to testify yet again, we're not sure that we're going to be able to get to a resolution. And so without that, we will have significant impact.
Do you have one more? No. Okay. Angel. Sorry, let me go back to...
Good evening, I'm Angel Morton. I'm a kindergarten teacher. I'm currently serving as the president of the Tacoma Education Association. And because I'm a kindergarten teacher, I know nursery rhymes, I know songs, I know finger plays, but I do not do PowerPoint slides. So you just have to look over here. It's great to be
turning
here.
them off for this part.
Thanks. It's great to be here tonight, and I just want to say that it's my pleasure to work as closely as I do with Carla and with Rosalind. We are on the same team together, even though we're all often on opposite sides of the table. But I think our work complements each other well, and always at the end of the day, we're working towards the same end, which is supporting the students in Tacoma. That's at the heart of everything that all of us do here. And I think that's great to remember and great to have that bond as we work together. But in my position at the union, Tacoma Education Association represents the 2,500 certificated employees, office professionals, and professional technical staff in Tacoma. And so I am the current figurehead that oversees that and works with the advocacy on that. WA members and the local unions are the strongest advocates for our students and school funding in the state legislature, in the courts, and at the ballot box. And we're very proud of what we have accomplished. We led and we funded the McCleary court case. We led the fight for smaller class sizes, for COLAs, and the simple majority for school levies. We're super disappointed about the school bond and the supermajority and that not passing. But we also do work to get education-friendly candidates elected. And it's also a pleasure to be here tonight with Representative Dolan, and just know that we have so many great people in Olympia that are there working for us. So TEA members are going to continue, along with all the other WA members, to advocate for increased state funding for public education and to work to make sure that our local communities can invest in student needs beyond their basic education. We agree with administration that competitive and professional pay is needed. We want to attract and keep those caring and qualified and committed teachers here in Tacoma to support our students, and we know that the community agrees with that. So imagine how delighted we were when the legislature added billions of dollars to their state budget to support education in our state. Money has been added for the past number of years, but last spring we had the additional funding that was put forward for salary increases, and it was high time for that to happen. And we knew in our office and in our district that we needed to get busy to work to get our compensation increased. Historically, Tacoma's been one of the highest paying districts to work for in the South Sound area, and for the past number of years we'd been falling behind because the state had been pumping money into the budget, but at our bargaining table we hadn't kept up because of the bargaining cycle we were on. So we were falling a little bit behind, and we really needed to work to get caught up, because it's super important to make sure that we keep our qualified teachers here in Tacoma, and it's so important that we have a salary schedule that will attract folks in. So with the additional money that was put in for salaries into the state budget last year, nearby districts were negotiating double-digit pay increases for their employees. And we went to the bargaining table to make sure that our members got that same thing. Competitive salaries are necessary. It's not cheap getting a teaching degree, and a lot of our folks come into the district with a boatload of student debt. And you know, teaching is a middle-class profession, and you need to be able to eventually purchase a home. You need to be able to send your kids to college. You need to be able to replace your 10-year-old Mazda or whatever it is that folks do to take care of their families. And so what I have seen is that a lot of folks leave the profession after a short time because they found they can make more money selling insurance, working in the travel industry, getting into business, and we don't want that to happen. It takes a certain heart and a special person to work with kids day in, day out, and we want to make sure that money is never the reason that people leave the profession. So we went to work on our salary negotiation because we wanted to attract and keep educators in Tacoma. Kids in Tacoma deserve the very best educators, just like kids everywhere. So sadly, you guys know what happened. We ended up in a strike situation, and the support from the community was just unbelievable. I think people recognized that after all these years of work, we had a very narrow window to make an impact and to change how salaries work for our people. So we survived that, all of us together, and we've come through to the other side. And for me, it's been exciting to see our Tacoma educators actually achieving some things that they didn't know that they could. So I have folks that have been able to quit their second job. I have folks that have been able to, replace their old car or to quit worrying so much about their family at home, and they're able to concentrate on their job when they're at work. I personally celebrated the new salary by buying a used pop-up trailer, and I couldn't be happier. So, all right, so I'm working off 2 sets of notes because my job is to respond to what's happening, and today there was a whole lot going on, and I never got my notes consolidated into one place. But we know that the legislator didn't write a budget that fully supports education. So you need to know that we are committed to keep doing that work. There's a lot of work to do around compensation, including health benefits, but we also want to make sure those wraparound services are provided for. Some of the employees that Carla and Roslyn spoke about, nurses, counselors, social workers. We want to make sure that our students are safe and healthy. We want to make sure that they're getting all the support they need, and we also want to make sure they continue getting good class sizes. So WEA continues to work with our allies, including local Democratic legislators in Olympia. We want to work to restore school levy flexibility. We want to improve that regionalization and experience formulas for salaries. And we want to increase overall state funding for K-12 public schools. This has been our top legislative priority this year. So that's what's going on. That's what we're working for. And you need to know that the educators in your community are very grateful to all of our students for their patience in the fall, for that late start of the school year. We're grateful to the community for all the support that we've received. We're grateful to Tacoma Public Schools for negotiating a fair wage. And we're grateful to the legislator for sending the funding to make sure education remains a middle-class occupation. And we're going to continue working together to make sure that we get a levy fix, make sure that students and programs are supported, and work to make sure that the kids in Tacoma receive that world-class education that we're so proud of offering. So thanks for being here tonight and your support of public education.
Thank you very much, Angel. And now Joel is going to be addressing the statewide perspective. I have to do my job here and get the thing back on. There we go. And Joel is the executive director of the Washington Association of School Administrators. Joel.
Thank you, Terry, and thank you for the invitation to sit on the panel this evening. And most of all, thanks to all of you for attending this event. I don't know if you realize it, but it's about 70 degrees outside. It'd be a wonderful evening to be anywhere. Please stay. It's going to get better when we get over to Representative Dolan here. You should also be proud of your schools. I know you're proud of your schools and here in Tacoma, and you should be. As Carla touched upon here a minute ago, that there's just some fantastic work that's occurring here in the Tacoma Public Schools, and the results speak for themselves in terms of what's happening here for kids. And there's a lot of things to be proud of here, and it doesn't happen just inside those schools. It takes the entire community getting behind you and to getting behind these people, and so appreciate your support in that regard. I am executive director of WASA. We have a membership of about 1,600 individuals, school leaders, superintendents, and district office administrator types, also a few principals. And we essentially represent their interests and the interests of 295 school districts across the entire state. So Terry asked me to provide kind of a statewide perspective in terms of the impact on all school districts in our state, whether they're small, medium, large, urban, rural, east side, west side. And what I will say is that these four ladies to my right did a really nice job of kind of setting the context. And so I'm going to do a little bit of duplication here. But the idea here is to help to understand that Tacoma's issues here and some of the things that they've underscored really are applicable across the entire state. And I think that's really important to remember. The second slide, if you'll just click all of those down there. Rosalind touched upon this slide earlier. I'm not going to repeat. What I have done here, what we're showing here, if you go back, is that those elements, these are the drivers for school funding. If you were to ask Carla or her staff, where does the money come from? How does school funding work? This is a list of the drivers that influence how dollars flow into schools. Those elements that are highlighted in red, those are the elements that have either been discarded or significantly restructured with the recent McCleary legislation addressing the McCleary mandate. If you'll go to the next slide, Terry. So one more bullet. There we go. So from our perspective, we think that there are two questions that we need to continue asking, and that we need to be diligent, and we need to be persistent. Does the legislature's McCleary solution provide ample funding? Terry spoke to that earlier. That's a constitutional mandate. It should be non-negotiable. What's the answer to this question? The second question is the legislature's new funding system equitable? And again, you've heard a little bit of that, and you've seen some data to that effect to this point. One thing that I think is important to remember, that McCleary was primarily about ample funding. It wasn't so much about equity, although we feel very strongly about fairness and equity. McCleary was really about ample, and I think that's part of the issue here and part of the challenge that we face. Some legislators that you talk to will tell you that the court has now made the ruling on McCleary and that we're done. Check the box off and move forward. You'll hear that as you engage with some legislators. We're hearing that on a fairly consistent basis. However, I think it's important to reflect back on the detail. The court actually said that we believe you have met the mandate. We believe that you have met the mandate, however, we're not completely sure. They basically said, let's watch this a bit over time to see how things settle out. And in fact, in the opinion, the wording is, let experience be the judge. And from our perspective, that leaves a crack in the door in terms of our obligation to continue pushing, asking these questions to ensure that they have met this idea of ample funding. WASA's approach to engaging legislators, we really focus in both of these contexts, both in terms of ample and in terms of, is this funding system fair? There are 295 school districts in our state, and we believe that all children and all young people should be afforded the same educational opportunities regardless of zip code. I heard Carla speak to this earlier as one of her vision and one of her priorities. We see that as a statewide mandate. No student, regardless of zip code, should have lesser opportunities and a less quality educational experience. If you'll go to the next slide, Terry. let's hold on this one for just a minute. Again, my predecessors covered this really well, but I want to touch upon a couple of things. Let's talk about ample funding first. And Rosalind did a nice job with this. And Terry made reference to the prototypical funding model. The prototypical funding model developed by the state, as Terry referenced earlier, really says this is the level of staffing that it takes to operate a school and offer appropriate levels of educational programming for kids. So one of the underlying pillars of the definition of basic education. The prototypical model was adopted 10 years ago. And I would have you think about the fact, have schools changed? Has society changed? Have needs changed for kids in the past 10 years? We would maintain that the prototypical model is no longer aligned with or truly reflective of what is actually needed for a basic education program. So there's a problem there in terms of the prototypical model. They spoke to what the state provides in funding for nurses and SROs and counselors and psychologists, all of those, and you saw the heavy, heavy reliance on Levy. We would say that that's basic education in this day and age. So the prototypical model, we would argue, is not sufficient at this time. It certainly doesn't meet your expectations for what you want for the kids and the young people in your communities. The other big concern around ample that we have is with special education. They referenced the Tacoma number. Statewide, between $300 and $400 million for special education are being funded out of local levy. Between $300 and $400 million. That's why your share of that is, what did I hear? $9 million of local levy money for special education. It's a federal law to provide services and programming for children and young people with disabilities. And we're paying a big chunk out of that with levies, which are subject to community vote. Kudos to you for stepping up and supporting your levies. But even more important than that, we have a moral obligation to serve all kids, including those with disabilities, and it ought to come from the state, and it ought to be fully funded by state funding. So those are two big problems that we have, or concerns that we have with ample funding, that we're going to want to continue to engage legislators in these discussions. Let's talk about equity for a minute, or equitable funding, or fairness. I'm not going to get into the levies. They did a fantastic job of speaking to that. In giving some examples, the chart that they showed with the list of districts, what I will tell you is you can apply that statewide. It's not just restricted to that particular list. This problem is happening all over the state, and I'm not going to step into that. They've done a great job of speaking to that. Local effort assistance, which is, as Terry explained, a way to kind of level the playing field. As levies were reduced, so was LEA. And those two factors are hammering districts. Another area of concern. Terry put a really nice graphic up there on teacher experience. Here's a snapshot of our state. Columbia School District in Northeast Washington. Does anybody in here know where Columbia Hunters is by chance? I didn't think so. Well, there's one over there, good. North of Spokane, and certainly you do. The average teacher experience in Columbia is 20 years. They have a senior staff, people who are experienced and committed to those schools and to those communities. 20 years. They're getting killed on this new formula in terms of how the funding for teacher compensation is now driven out in a more blanket approach. They're getting killed. Pasco, South Central Washington, fairly large school district, average teacher experience 10.4, half. Hunters and Pasco get the same allocation, basically, for a teacher compensation. As you might imagine, that's causing problems. Last thing I would speak to that hasn't been touched upon is that WASA this fall, we convened a small committee of CFO business managers and a couple of superintendents and did a deep dive into a deep dive analysis into the implementation of McCleary and what it was really happening to school districts. And the group worked diligently for about 3 months, and what we found, or what they found, is that there are 100 school districts in the state of Washington, 100 out of 295, who will actually have less money for basic operations, flexible money for basic operations. They'll actually have less money in 2019 than they had in 2017. This is after McCleary. 100 districts. Tacoma's on the list, $12.9 million short. This is after McCleary. It works out to about $450 per student. Asotin, a little district in southeast Washington, way down there, they're short $1,000 per student between 17 and 19. That's the McCleary fix. That's how they fixed Asotin. Moses Lake, a district in central Washington, 8,600 students, they're down about $200 per student. And Puyallup, I know there may be some folks from Puyallup here, and I think you were on the chart, that's about $300 per student. $300 per student doesn't sound like much until you think about a classroom with 20 students and do the math. Think about how much money that is in each classroom. That's a big hit. So if you go to the last slide, Terry, bottom line. My job, as you might imagine, is to work with all school districts and all superintendents. So I've got a lot of touch with all superintendents across the entire state. I've not yet spoken with a superintendent, not yet spoken with one superintendent whose district isn't looking at making some reductions in spending for next year. Not one. And then we've got the equity issue. Some are able to make some adjustments that are probably going to be doable. Others are cutting to the bone. And it depends on the luck of the draw in terms of whether you were more severely hurt than others. Districts like Tacoma will be making cuts as far away from the classroom as possible. I haven't seen their plan, but I can guarantee you that's what's in there. As far away from the classroom as possible in order to best preserve the educational experience for kids. That is in line with what communities would expect, and that philosophy is in line with what school leaders hold as a core value. But there are some difficult decisions coming down the pike here if we don't get some help and we don't get some adjustments and we don't develop a plan over the next couple of years to get this squared up. So we really appreciate your support. Last thing I would say is our students deserve nothing less than the best. They deserve nothing less than the best. So thank you.
Thank you, Joel. And now I especially want to thank Lori Dolan. After you heard all this stuff, here's our legislative representative on the panel to talk with us about the remainder of the session and what she thinks needs to be done and what may be able to be done. Thank you, Lori.
So I get to talk about the legislative fix, and I'm happy to be here tonight to do that. And I'm going to try this in the stand because I need to use my hands. And if it doesn't work, I'll pick it up. So I'll try to get to the right place. Good? Okay, so I'm kind of an odd duck in the legislature, and you need to know I'm here tonight with two hats. For 30 years, I was with the Spokane Public Schools. Think of Spokane Public Schools as Tacoma East. Tacoma and Spokane school districts are neck and neck in terms of how many kids they serve. Spokane oftentimes has a little tiny more poverty. Tacoma has more diversity, about the same special ed numbers. So a lot of the numbers are the same. Numbers of principals are pretty much the same. So I've kind of lived Tacoma East for 30 years of my life, so I really do understand Tacoma School District. The other thing I will tell you about both those school districts is they both do an amazing job of serving a really complex population of neighborhoods and kids and do amazing things for our students. So walking into this job, having spent 30 years in the Spokane Public Schools, where I was Dr. Dolan and I supervised 16 school principals, had a lot of respect in the district. I walk into this job where I'm one of 148 independent contractors. Now I'm Rep Dolan, and come to work every day trying to find common ground with 147 other people who all come from different neighborhoods and have different people who elect them. These are people without bosses. Our bosses are our constituents, the people who vote for us. We serve on a 2-year non-continuing contract. Educators will find that humorous, probably. Educators are always looking for the continuing contract. There's no continuing contract in these jobs. So it's an interesting scenario. It's the kind of weirdest place I've ever worked, I have to tell you. I came into this job in 2016. And I don't know if any of you remember this, but the spring and summer of 2016, there were all sorts of editorials in our major newspapers across the state of Washington making the point that the reason we had inequities between school districts was the salary schedule. And I remember reading those editorials thinking, what? How can anybody connect paying teachers their wages with inequities among districts? I mean, the real inequities among districts in Washington state are property taxes and property values. We've heard a lot of people talking about that. We really can't go in and fix that very easily unless we want to really incentivize manufacturing and new businesses going into Davenport, Washington, and creating really good family wage jobs. So if we're not willing to actually go there and change the structure of Washington state, we're going to be dealing with these huge inequities caused by property values and the jobs that people in those communities have. So I come from 30 years of helping with the Spokane Public Schools budget. And now the newspaper, right before I am elected, is saying that salary schedules created the inequities, and we have the final piece of the McCleary fix coming into place. So the McCleary fix did fix the ample part in terms of what the Supreme Court says. I mean, we weren't quite there. They were charging us $100,000 a day, which frankly is peanuts compared to what we spend on K-12 education, and we were just putting that into a little savings account that then went into the final fix. So that was more just the Supreme Court feeling like they were doing something that was helping. The money part of it actually wasn't big enough to matter in terms of $100,000 a day compared to what we spend on K-12 education. But when they said at the very end, not quite ample enough, you need to put in an extra $1 billion, we put in an extra $1 billion. And what you saw happen with that is suddenly all the salary kind of guidelines that we had put in place for bargaining sort of disappeared. And I have to tell you, as someone who is a school teacher, who has a daughter-in-law who's a school teacher, a grandson who's in kindergarten, and knowing that teacher salaries needed to improve, that didn't bother me too much. Suddenly our teachers getting paid a lot better than they were. But now we're faced with this situation of the McCleary fix actually broke two mechanisms that are really critical for K-12 funding to make it predictable and sustainable. We took away the local levies. We screwed those down so tight by putting in so much state funding that school boards who are used to having a checking account to do the stuff, the special stuff they want to do for their public schools, no longer had the ability to make those choices. Do we have any school board members in this room? Okay, so suddenly your checking account was gone because you're used to being able to raise money in your local levy. And in Washington state, we're really proud of our public schools. We look at the little neighborhood school across from our house and we feel ownership in that school. I mean, you might serve on the committee to hire the new second grade teacher. It's not like state government. It's not like driving by a DSHS building. It's your public school. And the thing that makes it so complex in Washington state is we have this constitution that says it's the paramount duty of the state to provide ample funding for basic education. But back in about 1884, we started electing our first school boards in Washington state. So you have the state with this ample funding, paramount duty to do basic education, and you have local school boards who are hired by their districts to make all those education decisions about what extra bells and whistles do you want for your kids in your schools. We've got to keep both those things in place. A lot of people through this whole McCleary mess have been saying the state should just take over the whole thing. Like, get rid of school boards, just let the state run education. I think that would be the death of public education in Washington State. I have to tell you, as somebody who worked on bonds and levies for most of my life, the downside of being in public education is you have to pass bonds and levies. The upside of being in public education is you have to pass bonds and levies. And doing that means you stay really close to your communities. I don't think any form of government is as close to their community as our public schools and our teachers. The other thing I would share with you is, having been in my job with the Spokane Public Schools, I have been in more meetings than I care to remember handing pink slips to brand new teachers. And I don't know how many of you have ever had that opportunity. It is heart-wrenching. The people in the room, usually it's the principal, the teacher, me as the principal's boss, we're all in tears because we are looking at this excited young teacher, new degree, first teaching job. They have student loans. They oftentimes have a mortgage, oftentimes have little kids at home. They have family needs that they need to be getting a paycheck for. And now, after getting their first job that they're so excited to have, we give them a pink slip, say, we might not have a job for you next year, because we don't know what the legislature's going to do, right? So what happens is these are really talented people. And they look at that pink slip and they think, I've wanted to be a teacher my whole life, but I don't think my family can deal with a job that's this shaky. And so they go out and they start looking around. And too often, they find a really great other job, because who wouldn't hire them? And they say to us, oh, we have a job for you? Sorry, I have another job. It's been a great year. Thanks for the experience. And they're gone. And I wake up in the middle of the night right now thinking, if we can't get the levy fix in place, if we can't fix these two mechanisms, and I'll talk about the other one in a second, those pink slips are actually going to go out. I mean, people already know they're coming, and we're going to lose a lot of really great teachers. So I have this personal sense of urgency, having had to be the person who actually has those meetings in my past life. So the levy thing was a mechanism that we broke. The other mechanism is getting rid of the salary schedule. And Terry did a really nice job showing you different salary schedules. So because of the belief 3 years ago, when the whole McCleary fix finally started to happen, that salary schedule was creating inequities, the 8 people in the room that made these decisions, and it was 2 people from each caucus, so 2 from the Republican House, 2 from the Democratic House, 2 from the Senate Republicans, and 2 from the Senate Democrats. 8 people. I think a couple of them had been school board members, but there was not much staff in that room, and they were making these decisions, and they decided that if we drove out money on the average teacher's salary, that would make more equity among the 295 school districts. I don't know, it seems so simple that you actually just pay people the salary that they signed up for. I mean, to me, that's a simple concept. So to suddenly do this average teacher salary, what that created is districts that have lesser experienced teachers. You mentioned one of them. They ended up getting overfunded, because now we're giving them money according to the average teacher's salary. And the money that they're getting extra should have been going to the districts that had the more experienced teachers. So the 2 things that I have been personally trying to get back to is fixing the levy situation so that we can actually make it less tight and give school boards and communities more capacity to raise money to do their own bells and whistles, and also getting the salary schedule back. It's called staff mix, when you actually get an index based on where everybody falls on that salary schedule. So I don't think we're going to actually get there on the staff mix this year, but I do think we can get there on the levy deal. Right now we have a House bill, I wrote it down, House Bill 2140. And for those of you who actually go in and check bills, House Bill 2140, if you go in and look at it, right now is what we call a title-only bill. So it has a bill number, and it says an act relating to K-12 funding, and there's nothing else in it. In the next couple of days, our whole plan will be in it, because we're this close to actually putting it out there. Your district is fully aware of what's going to be in it in terms of levies, because as we've been working on the levy thing, we've checked. I mean, we have a lot of districts coming to see us every single day, and we're always checking with them to see, will this work for you? Will this work for you? Every idea we come up with, we run all these long sheets of paper and look at how it impacts every single district. So by us kind of untightening that levy piece, that is the main thing we can do to make it more predictable and sustainable. So when school boards and superintendents look out 3 years, they're not in the red, they're actually in the black, which is what they always used to be until the past 2 years happened. So those are the two mechanisms. There's this thing called experience factor that they threw in, where districts that had the really experienced staff get an extra 4%. That doesn't begin to actually pay for how much more those salaries cost. So we really do need to work on that experience factor. The special ed. I'm going to throw out some numbers. In fact, I'm actually going to hold up these charts. I decided not to use them, but I want you to see them. So in 2011 to 2013, the state was putting in $13.4 billion into K-12 education. In 2019 to 21, we're putting in $26.7 billion. So we doubled how much the state has given K-12 in those few years. The ample funding, the truth is the state has given K-12 education all the money it had. I mean, and that is the truth. I'm going to talk about tax structure before I finish what I'm saying. So in special ed, back in fiscal year 2013, the state was funding $660 million in special ed, and by 2021 we'll be funding $1.520 billion. So it's gone up 3 times in terms of special ed funding. So the truth is, people keep saying, oh, the state's not doing enough money. We actually sent out a whole bunch of money. We sent out all the money we had, and so now we need to do something about that if we're going to try to fund it more. And
We've got about a minute, Lori, and then we got to go to questions.
Okay, so let's go to the tax structure thing.
Okay.
So this is really small. You can see it when you get home. You can look at it more carefully, but basically what it shows you, the most important part is the bold words at the top that say, while revenues are projected to grow by a 9% biennium, in a biennium, the costs of continuing current programs are estimated to grow at 14%. So we have a real structural problem in the state of Washington, because the things that we care about, the things that we want to fund, are growing by 14% a year, and even in a good year, our revenue's growing by 9%. So we need a different tax structure. And that's all this chart's supposed to show you. The 4.1 billion that we just, or 4.2 billion that we just got in, just got eaten up by McCleary. To pay for what we did for McCleary, 4.2 billion. So now anything else we want to do, I have a great school safety bill that we just passed. To pay for that, it's $4 million a year. I can't pay for that. We can't have that bill if we don't get more revenue. So you're about to see us vote on a capital gains tax and a progressive real estate excise tax. And those are 2 really important things that will start giving us more tools in the toolbox to actually change the incoming revenue. And I'll stop there and we can go to questions.
So thank you. Before everybody starts, bottom line, this is about the children in our state. And I know in our city is a better city with more economic development to generate the kind of jobs that Lori's talking about, because we have a better education system. If we screw that up, we're going to screw up a lot of stuff for a lot of people. And that's just our town. And that's the same kind of picture, that people that are really doing their work, education is at the heart of it for the young people to build a different kind of future. So I want to give one more thank you to this wonderful panel of people that are fighting every day to make this work. And then I'm going to turn the mic over to Larry, and he's going to be taking questions. He has a couple of questions himself, but when you get the mic, please put it at your mouth, because he's taping this stuff, so you won't be heard if you've got it around your armpit or something.
Thanks. In fact, I want to go first over here to State Representative Mari Levitt. Mari,
Nice to see you.
hang on. What we've just heard is a fairly consistent list of the kind of needs that most of the districts, all of the districts have. How optimistic are you that most of that list is going to be budgeted in that bill that's coming out? Or do you think that we're headed for driving many districts into bankruptcy? Just briefly.
I was going to take your mic. Before I answer that, could I introduce Representative Mari Levitt, who's
Yeah,
here?
I'm going to go do that in a minute.
She's one of our brand new educators that just got elected this year, and we're so happy to have her in the House. So I am pretty confident that the time to pass like a capital gains tax, which is critical to going forward, is this year. I mean, we're in a crisis mode. We know we can't fund all this if we don't do that, and I think we have enough votes in the House, and I hope they have enough in the Senate. Passing the levy, I think we have enough votes in the House. We will not get Republican votes on any of these bills. If we get a Republican vote, I will be stunned. So we have to do it with Democrats. I think we can pass it. We have 57 Democrats in the House. We have about 3 Democrats in the Senate who don't think we need to do anything about levies. So the trick is between now and a few weeks from now to get political pressure there.
Okay, Joel, as you look across the state, how optimistic are you? By the way, Joel has working for him a wonderful man named Dan Steele. And every Friday afternoon, Dan publishes the TWIO, the Week in Olympia, which is a complete catalog of everything that's happened in Olympia in education this week. It's worth going to his website. Dan's a national asset of ours. So how optimistic are you, Joel?
Well, I talked to Dan today. How many of you know Dan? Dan is stellar. He's top drawer. Dan is typically not the most optimistic man in the room, I'll tell you that. What we've heard pretty consistently is that there isn't a lot of new money. Representative Dolan just spoke to the potential for new revenue, which is would be a really positive development. But school districts pretty much across the board are planning for the worst and hoping for the best. We're hoping we'll get a little bit of progress made this go around.
And teachers, how about your colleagues across the state? Is there a general optimism that you're going to be able to solve these problems, do you think?
There is a lot of optimism that this will be solved. When we speak with the legislators that represent us in Olympia, we're assured they're working on a levy fix at the bare minimum, and we're confident that our local funding is going to come back and that'll be a great step in the right direction.
You might take just 30 seconds and remind these people of the teacher crisis we have in the state, that we're radically understaffed with teachers.
So it's hard to find teachers now, so we don't want to lose them. We want to make sure we do everything in our power to hang on to them. I think every year, in recent years, Tacoma has started the year with open positions, a couple open positions, and it is at a crisis point because it hasn't been a middle-class occupation for years to come into. People haven't been coming into education, and so this salary boost was a big win for folks to attract people in the profession, and we're hoping that that's going to be instrumental in getting more of our young folks or more of our second career people into education so that we can fix this problem with lack of qualified folks.
Coming out of PLU for 2 years, we have a huge teacher shortage. We're talking with the deans across the state, getting people into the system. There's all kinds of alternative routes jumping up where people are changing careers. Some of them are good, some of them are not good in terms of the experience. So we're going to continue to have that shortage if we can't support people when they get in the districts. We've got a big issue there. In the future, Larry, let's move it.
years?
So, I mean, finance people generally aren't overly optimistic individuals to begin with. I would say no, they're not very optimistic. They're hopeful, but I've heard our superintendent say a number of times hope isn't a strategy. So
Right.
as Joel indicated, we're going to be working hard to plan for the worst case scenario and then be prepared to operate on the best case scenario if it does come to fruition.
And Carla, you've been lobbying, and you're an effective lobbyist. How optimistic are you?
I'm optimistic that the problem will be solved eventually. What I'm worried about is 1920,
Okay.
because if it doesn't get solved by the end of April with some kind of prediction, then 1920 is gone. Because I've got to make sure I have a balanced budget for 1920.
God, make that point again to make sure that we understand what you just said. This budget has to have the fix so that your 2021 budgeting will be on track. Is
It's
that
actually
right?
1920.
1920.
We're putting a budget together right now for 1920.
Right.
If we don't have the levy money that was voted on by our voters
Right.
to come into to fruition this year, then we can plan a budget for 2021, but 1920 will be gone.
So, Murray, you're going to be voting for these budgets. Are you going to give these people everything they want?
To be determined.
All right, let's get to people in the audience.
Okay. Where was that?
Just shout it out. I'll bring you this. We'll let him work on this.
Hi, my name is Diane Tilstra, and I serve on the board of Washington Trafficking Prevention. And one of our strategic planning sessions, I did some study on the state site, on the state superintendent's site, about security and safety in schools. And this is just a comment. You know, teachers and administrators are responsible for these kids door to door, and for their safety and their security. And I know that some people will find this hard to believe, but there are kids in the middle schools and junior highs that are actually being sex trafficked in Pierce County and King County. And I just want to say to you that the responsibilities of teachers now, since the 40s and 50s, has tripled in terms of what is expected by families and community for their children in your possession during their school day. So another argument for the legislature, and thank you very much for your bill that unfortunately is an unfunded mandate for safety and security. All right, thank you.
Next. Here we go. Yes, ma'am.
Representative Dolan, thank you, for the work you do. You mentioned your title-only bill that will be coming out. A lot of us have been putting a lot of energy into contacting you and all your colleagues about 5313. Are we going to need to shift our strategy, and is that going to be more of a companion-style bill? Like, what will you need from us? What do we, there are competing things that happen sometimes, and we probably want to know where we most effectively channel our conversation.
It's the Senate.
That's the
levy bill.
Senate one, but she mentioned a title-only bill that hasn't really articulated around levies yet.
So throughout the session so far, I meet regularly with Senator Wellman. We're pretty tight in what we're proposing in both. They're slightly different, not hugely different. So they're not companion bills, but out of that, we'll be able to find agreement. We just need to get those 3 other votes in the Senate.
Bob Mack.
I don't want this question interpreted as being negative, but we've sat here for over an hour hearing each of the speakers criticized the previous legislation as severely flawed and a mistake in certain respects, with one referring to this, apparently that the staff didn't know or had inadequate information. So I have a two-part question. Did the disadvantaged districts make their position known to the legislators who voted for the bill, which I think included most of the Tacoma area legislators? And why did they vote for it if the flaws are pointed out to them?
I want to take first crack at that, and then Lori can probably have much more accurate insights, and I'm sure you guys do. But when the teachers got organized to go for salaries, it's one clear message. When the districts began to study what had happened in 17 and began to realize the complexity, the disparities among the districts made it very hard for the administrative people to go in with one voice and get everybody convinced. One of the biggest problems, I think, just as watching this from the sidelines, is the complexity of the issue and how it affected different people in different parts of the state. And so people were trying to get there, and many of, I know there was a long-term commitment by the financial folks to sit down and talk about the system, but some of that seems to have been just ignored at the last minute. But it's been, because when you see how hard this was to even comprehend tonight, no one really understood it was happening until 3 weeks after the session was over, and they had started putting the pieces together. So that's a kind of beginning place.
So I'm going to take you back to the end of June in 2017, and at that point in time there was a Republican Senate that said the only way they would be willing to raise money to pay for K-12 education was property taxes. That was what the Democrats did not want. We wanted a different tax revenue to do that. So up until the very last hour when we would have had to shut the state down, we were still trying not to do this on property taxes. So the debate at that point in time was actually more the funding source. I personally knew that those two mechanisms were broken. I kept talking to our two representatives in that 8. But frankly, I was the brand new legislator who, is brand new on the scene, and they actually go by seniority a lot there and who they listen to. And even though I had 30 years of K-12 experience, they really kind of have their own structure of seniority, and that's the voices that were listened to. So there's nothing neat and tidy about getting 148 independent contractors to come together and find common ground. It's not like being in charge of a school district organization where you can actually do a little more mission control. So that's the best answer I can give you. Democracy's messy.
Next question over here. Or was there a... Sir.
Yeah, I'm going to ask Carla this question. My name is Fred Hamill. I work here in the School of Education. I represent about 50 Masters of Education students that are completing their student teaching this spring, and about 80% of them are in the Tacoma schools right now, having some really impressive experiences with educators here. What would you tell them, or what can you tell them? And this, I think I might know the answer, but I'm going to ask you. About what the hiring season might mean for them this spring, especially in relationship to Tacoma, where many of them want to work.
I don't see a good prospect for hiring season this year. Right now, we are counting eagerly people who have made a commitment to retire, or that are resigning because they're going to Tahiti to live, and using that to there's not anybody really going to Tahiti, but but we are counting those positions to offset who we think we're going to have to let go. So I don't, now if they're hard to hire, if they're in a hard to hire position, special ed, science, math, then there's some prospect for that. That may change if if something comes through and it comes through before the end of the year, that could change.
And a question from UW Tacoma faculty.
Thank you, Larry. And my question is also to Superintendent Santorno. You in passing, you mentioned that this issue about the inequalities in the funding is a civil rights issue. Do you mind kind of expanding on that particular point a little bit?
A civil rights issue to me is when there is a basic inequity between what poor students get and what middle class, upper class students get. This is the most basic example of that I've ever seen. So students in Tacoma that are English language learners, that are disabled, that are sick, that are kids of color, and that are immigrants and are refugees have been relegated to a much lower a formula that dictates they will get less than a district that has a much higher white population. I'm sorry, to me that is civil rights.
Here we go. The court was asking the McCleary lawsuit to define ample, and the court did have a definition. It is, quote, fully sufficient, comma, more than merely adequate.
Hi, my name is Suzanne, and this question is for Carla. Sorry. So I serve on the South End Neighborhood Council, and I have a daughter that attends Mann Elementary School. Just to go back to your earlier statement that we should be doing everything to make sure that you can't tell where a student lives based on their academic experiences, what are you doing to make sure that the South End and East Side students in particular aren't suffering even more than they have in the past?
So the programs that we deliberately put into our South End and East Side schools are committed to, bringing up the bar, making sure. So every preschool, and I'm not saying that, usually what happens is we say, hey, we have got to put a preschool in these, in these schools that tend to be low income, and then once we start putting those preschools in, we see that it's making a difference, then they spread out throughout the rest of the city. So I'd say preschool is a good example. I'd say after school programs is a good example. I'd say the middle school athletic program was totally committed to getting kids who weren't getting an opportunity to do extracurricular things. That was a program. High school, all the things that we're doing to make sure that there's a college culture so that kids don't have parents that are going to say, hey, you're going to go to college, you can do it. We want to have a person that's in that building that's telling them that same thing every day and getting them the workshops we have to have students get FAFSA applications filled out. Their applications for money. We want to make sure that there is an advocate in every school. The family liaisons that we just put into schools was because we saw a need in some schools where there were so many family things going on that they needed another help for a person in the building that could go to the family and say, hey, it looks like you need coats. It looks like you need shoes. We had one mom that came in and her student is autistic. He can't stand rain. Not good to not stand rain in Washington. So gave him a whole supply of umbrellas so to make sure that so anything we can do that's based on a need is what we're providing to those schools. Rigor. Oh, that's the other thing. I'm sorry. That's good question. The other thing is that we want to make sure all students have access to advanced classes. Not that you just get in it if you've got a Barracuda mother that's saying, get in there, take that advanced math, you better be in it. No, we want somebody else who's in the school saying, no, you're ready to take that, take it. So if you get a proficient score, you're in that class. I love it when I go to schools and I find this student that was pushed in the class and I say, how you doing? They go, I'm doing all right. I said, I'm the superintendent, how can I help you? And they say, get me out of here. And the reason they say that is they know they're being successful, but they would have never chosen it on their own.
Terry, how are we doing for time?
I just want to add something about what Tacoma's done that I was so excited about, is bringing the community in, having 5 indicators in Tacoma. All this money we're talking about that has been used very carefully. There have also been a bunch of grants that the district has gotten because of the work they're doing. And these indicators of preschool, 3rd grade reading, 6th grade graduation, high school, and then beyond, they've had physicians that with little kids that start to come into preschool and they have a hearing loss or a vision loss and the family doesn't have the money to get the medical help. the physicians in this community have volunteered to help. At each of those indicator levels, they've reached out not only in the education system, but partnered with people in the community so that those things happen for the kids.
I've made a mistake by not defining who we is, because we is all of you. I see so many people in this room that are part of the partnerships that have helped us accomplish it. And that's the big unique thing about Tacoma, is that everybody comes up to the table and helps students, and that's why we've been as successful. So it's
Question
totally
for
a
a school
community.
board member.
Last question, Larry, because we're out of time.
Let's take.
Oh, okay.
I'll get
Oh, two more? Two more. All right.
Mine is actually pretty quick. You know, again, Representative Dolan, thank you for your service and your advocacy. We really do appreciate that. Can you please help the audience understand regarding how the bill process works for 5313? As you mentioned, it's that Senate bill that's coming through regarding the levy. I see that it's in Ways and Means right now. What can we do as citizens to support that and help that move through? And alternately, when your bill is ready?
And let's take this lady's question.
So the Senate bill's being heard tomorrow, right? And our bill will be out probably Monday, so then it will be heard in our Appropriations Committee. And the Senate and the House will work together to figure out the path forward. So you can go testify on both bills and say, we need these bills. I mean, equally testify on them. You don't need to pick one over the other. Either bill, we're going to have to reach agreement on how we go forward. Both bills would get us forward. And I'm sure districts will weigh in on both bills. So
They go on the website and send in things to the...
yeah, you can send emails. We get about 800 emails a day, so if we don't answer emails, that's why. But go ahead and testify on both. Say they're great. We need a levy bill. We have to get those 3 votes in the Democratic Senate. I've said that, right? It's not going to work if we don't get those 3 votes.
Yes, thank you. So thank you for holding this panel discussion. Hearing this from a perspective of a person who's first generation immigrant here, therefore ELL in my high school years in the Tacoma Public School, thank you. But also having been an educator for the last 27 years in the Puyallup Public School, I guess I plead to any person here as we create the fix, so to speak, to be mindful of just the unintended consequence. Because for me right now, the biggest unintended consequence that's heartbreaking to see is the cannibalization among K-12 folks within their own school district.
What?
Just cannibalizing each other within our own school district. Because it seems like the fix was not, the messages sent out with the money pumped in, so to speak, in the school district aren't as well defined. And to me, when I also see a lot of CFOs resigning their posts, that to me is never a good sign as a state. So when I hear you say typically CFOs are not optimistic in nature, it gives me a sense of kind of worrisome in the next couple of years of what's going to happen. I guess what I'm trying to say is, no matter what the fix is, and no matter what advocacy everyone here will try to do on their own, think about what is ample for whom? For whom?
So don't fight with each other. Stay unified on the larger picture of the fairness and the ample nature and the equitable nature.
Yes, thank you.
Yes. So I know we're right out of time. I know we want to close it down. Are you saying another question? Okay. All right. I'll grab this one, Larry.
Sorry, I had my hand up for a while, so it's a little numb. My name's Kimber, and my story is that at another school district, my daughter was sexually assaulted because she's queer, and we actually moved to Tacoma Public Schools because of the whole child program. Because that she would be in a program where she would be supported and protected and not bullied, and especially not assaulted in school. So when a high school teacher at Wilson recently had an editorial published in the TNT, and the school board, all of the school board except for one school board director signed on to the letter essentially condemning what was said in the TNT, which was very disturbing for me as a parent for my child. Carla, what is your position on not having the support of the entire board for diversity and inclusion in Tacoma Public Schools?
I do have the support of all 5 of my school board members, regardless of who signed a letter or whatever. I do know that I've got school boards that will protect the needs of all students and that will really work towards supporting all of our kids. And they care, the policies that are in place in Tacoma Public Schools are put there to support all kids and to take care of them. And you know, they have different opinions from time to time, but there's never been a time where they haven't sat you know, side by side with me and voted for the support of students.
Thank you, Carla. I know, and thank you for your difficult question, and it comes back to what we've been talking tonight, are the children that we're educating and our future, and working together in a unified manner to try to make all boats rise and all children be safe and all children find their power and find their future. So I really thank this wonderful panel, and I thank all of you for being here, and I thank the City Club for giving us the shot.
Well, thank you, Terry, for moderating this panel. And I guess I do just have one last, if you, like from each panelist, what is, just 15 seconds, or you know, like 30 seconds, what would you like to leave for this panel, for this audience to know?
Tacoma Public Schools will continue to do good work. Doesn't matter what we have. We have you, we have the community, we'll deal with what we get and we'll go to the next step. And we want all of us to leave here knowing that we have to advocate for what we need for our students. And if we don't have it, then we need to say that it's not fair.
We've worked really hard to protect the resources of the school district and find ways to make sure that we're investing for students. We're going to continue focusing our efforts on maintaining good fiscal responsibility and financial health, regardless of what happens with the legislature. So know that we aren't going to decimate the system. We aren't going to go for broke. We are going to make smart, targeted resource decisions as we move forward.
I guess I would like you to leave knowing that all of us up here are working together to support our students. I would like to respond that as an educator and as a union member, I am for the way they have surrounded diversity. No, it's, oh, there it's back. Thank you. I think Tacoma's done an incredible job being supportive of the LGBTQ community, our kids of colors, our people across the socioeconomic spectrum. And I'm just pleased to say that my 2,400 members are in there every day working their hearts out and working in conjunction with all the resources that are here to do the very best for the kids in Tacoma, and will continue to work in Olympia and work in the city and anywhere that needs to happen to make sure that all of this is fully funded and that we can continue the robust work that we're doing now.
I've been a school superintendent for 20 years prior to taking on this job, and this is the most challenging time we've seen for schools. That said, school districts have amazing creativity and amazing commitment to doing what's best and right for kids and making it work, playing the hand that you're dealt and making it work, which I think sometimes we're our own worst enemies in that regard over the years, is that we have done some magnificent work to make things come together for kids. And that doesn't take away the fact that there are some shortfalls here that need to be addressed, but I can guarantee you that these folks, as well as everyone else across the state, the kids are coming in September. They're going to show up on the first day, and we'll be ready for them. Anything that we can get in terms of help and support from the legislature will be most appreciated, and I know Representative Dolan is all in on that. So thank you for the opportunity this evening.
So I'd leave us with, we have 1.1 million kids who come to our schools every day, and they're depending on us, and I think working together we can do it. I know that Rep. Levitt and I will do our best internally to get this levy thing passed. What you can do is use your political voice. We need your pressure on the legislature to know that by April 28th, we're going to have a levy fix in place. We cannot leave town without a levy fix. And it's been delightful to be with you tonight. Thank you. Okay, so the Senate bill is 31. I have so many bills in my head. The House bill that's
5313?
5313, yes, that's a Senate levy bill. The House levy bill is 2140. Don't look till Monday because right now it's empty.
All right, I'd like to thank again our panelists for making numbers what they look like for our communities, our children, and our programs. They do say that investing in education is the best investment for our future, and it does create winners for our region and globalization, so the best investments we can make. And also advocacy is for education. So I'd like to thank again Carlos Santorno, Superintendent of Tacoma, and Rosalind Medina, CFO of Tacoma, and Angel Morton, kindergarten teacher and president of WEA, and Joel On, executive director of WASA. And thank you for joining us. I know Olympia is crazy during this time. Representative Lori Dolan of the 22nd Legislative District. Thank you.